The Amazon Rainforest, a living history of survival and adaptation. The Amazon Rainforest stands as a testament to the power of survival and adaptation. Spanning millions of square kilometers, it is home to an incredible array of plant and animal species, many found nowhere else on Earth. Over thousands of years, indigenous peoples have thrived here, developing unique ways to live in harmony with the land. Every layer of the forest, from the canopy to the forest floor, reveals a story of resilience, interconnectedness, and the relentless drive to endure. Deep in the Venezuelan jungle, Spanish conquistador Francisco de Orellana's men were dying. It was 1541, and they had been following rumored golden cities for months, only to discover something far more valuable and terrifying than any treasure: a living world that had been writing its own history for 55 million years. As his chronicler, Gaspar de Carvajal scribbled frantically by firelight, documenting encounters with sophisticated indigenous civilizations and impossibly vast forests, he unknowingly became the first European to witness the Amazon's greatest secret. This wasn't just a wilderness, but humanity's oldest and most successful experiment in sustainable civilization. The Amazon we know today is not the pristine, untouched wilderness that Europeans imagined. It is, in fact, one of history's greatest monuments to human ingenuity, a 2.1 million square mile testament to indigenous peoples who didn't conquer nature, but became part of its evolutionary story. For over 12,000 years, they transformed what could have been an impenetrable green hell into a thriving homeland for an estimated 10 million people, divided among hundreds of distinct cultures, each as sophisticated as any European kingdom. Consider this. When Carvajal described seeing cities stretching as far as the eye could see along the Amazon River, he wasn't exaggerating. Archaeological evidence now confirms that the pre-Columbian Amazon supported urban centers rivaling medieval European cities. The Marajoara culture alone, flourishing from 400 to 1400 CE on Marajo Island, built elaborate earthworks, created intricate pottery that modern artists still study, and developed agricultural systems so advanced that the soil they engineered, terra preta or Amazonian dark earth, remains the most fertile on the continent today, 5 centuries after their disappearance. These weren't primitive hunter-gatherers struggling against an hostile environment. They were environmental engineers of extraordinary sophistication. The Kayapo people developed controlled burning techniques that increased biodiversity rather than destroying it. The Yanomami created forest gardens that mimicked natural succession patterns, producing more food per acre than modern monoculture farming. The ancient inhabitants of the Llanos de Mojos built a hydraulic civilization in Bolivia's floodplains, constructing thousands of miles of canals, raised fields, and causeways that transformed seasonal wetlands into year-round agricultural paradise. But here's where the story takes its most tragic turn and reveals the Amazon's most remarkable resilience. Between 1500 and 1650, European diseases decimated 90% of the indigenous population. Entire civilizations vanished so completely that their cities became legends, their agricultural lands returned to forest, and their sophisticated environmental management systems collapsed. The virgin rainforest that 19th century naturalists like Alexander von Humboldt described with such romantic awe was actually a recovering ecosystem, reclaiming territories once managed by millions of human hands. Yet the forest remembered. Trees that had been carefully cultivated by indigenous peoples continued to grow in patterns that puzzled botanists for centuries. Fruit trees clustered along ancient travel routes. Medicinal plants thrived in forest clearings where shamans once gathered them. Brazil nut trees, which indigenous peoples had transplanted and protected for millennia, stood like silent monuments in groves that made no sense to European botanists who assumed they grew randomly. The Amazon had become a living archaeological site, where every tree and trail told the story of humanity's longest-running partnership with nature. The forest itself had become both the historian and the history. This partnership didn't end with European contact. It evolved. Rubber tappers in the late 19th century, led by figures like Chico Mendes, rediscovered indigenous techniques for harvesting forest products without destroying the ecosystem. They learned that the rubber trees their global economy depended on could only survive within the complex web of relationships that indigenous peoples had spent millennia cultivating. When European colonists tried to establish rubber plantations in Asia using seeds smuggled from the Amazon, the trees died without their native ecosystem. A lesson in interconnectedness that took the industrial world decades to understand. Today's environmental scientists are only beginning to decode the sophisticated ecological knowledge embedded in indigenous practices. The Amazon's incredible biodiversity, housing 10% of all known species on just 2% of Earth's surface, isn't an accident of nature, but the result of active management by peoples who understood something that modern science is just rediscovering: that human beings can increase rather than diminish natural complexity if they learn to think like the forest itself. The Amazonian approach to agriculture, polyculture systems that mimic forest succession, produces food while actually increasing biodiversity. Their understanding of plant relationships enabled them to develop over 3,000 medicinal compounds, many of which form the basis of modern pharmaceuticals. Their fire management techniques created the savanna forest mosaics that support the Amazon's greatest concentrations of wildlife. They didn't fight natural processes, they amplified them. But perhaps the most profound lesson of Amazonian history lies in its conception of time. While European civilizations built monuments to defy time, Amazonian peoples built systems that grew stronger with time. Their agricultural soils improved with each generation. Their forest gardens became more productive as they matured. Their cultural knowledge deepened through centuries of observation and adaptation. They understood what modern sustainability experts are struggling to grasp: that the most enduring human achievements are those that make themselves indispensable to the natural systems they inhabit. This isn't just ancient history, it's urgently contemporary. As climate change threatens global stability, the Amazon stands as both a warning and a guide. Its current destruction rate of 10,000 square kilometers annually represents not just an environmental catastrophe, but the erasure of humanity's most successful experiment in sustainable civilization. Every burned hectare contains libraries of ecological knowledge that took millennia to develop. Yet, indigenous communities continue their work as the forest's historians and guardians. The territories they manage show deforestation rates nearly 20 times lower than surrounding areas. They continue to discover new species, develop sustainable harvesting techniques, and maintain the complex relationships that keep this living library intact. They remind us that the Amazon's greatest treasure was never gold or rubber, but knowledge, the accumulated wisdom of how human intelligence can serve rather than subvert natural systems. The conquistadors came looking for El Dorado, the city of gold. They never found it because they were looking in the wrong places with the wrong eyes. El Dorado wasn't a city. It was a way of living that turned an entire rainforest into a golden civilization, where wealth meant abundance for all species, where power meant the ability to enhance rather than dominate natural processes, where progress meant leaving the world richer than you found it. That civilization still exists, encoded in every carefully tended forest garden, every traditional story, every indigenous community that continues to think like the forest. The Amazon's living history of survival and adaptation isn't just a fascinating tale from the past. It's a blueprint for the future, written in the world's most enduring ink. The patient wisdom of trees, the persistent flow of rivers, and the unbroken chain of human cultures that learn to make themselves at home in the world without destroying it. The question that remains is whether the rest of humanity will learn to read this history before it's too late to write our own chapter in its continuing story.